So I go back to this concept of intersectionality, the visual aspect, and I ask you to think about what's being left out, right? I did a visual that includes several different categories, but I'm certain that when you look at it, you can add some things to it, and you can ask some questions that might be able to expand this visual. Um, and and the other thing that I'd like you to consider is when you meet an individual, what are the ways in which you interact with them? If you're, for example, a coworker to them, a classmate, if they're your professor, if they're your friend, a community member, what are those different ways that you're interacting with them that you may not be considering their intersectional experience? And I use these visuals, these photos to give you a moment to think uh, about those interactions. You can add many more faces to those images, but you can also add yourself to it and ask, what are the ways in which people are interacting with you based on your perceived social categories? What are the ways that you can deconstruct those stereotypes and those myths about those social categories? And what are the true challenges that you experience? How can people better be your ally and better kind of meet your needs when they interact with you based on those social categories? And then I'd like to visit Marilyn Frye's birdcage metaphor. She says that many people can't see that there are multiple barriers because, for example, they might see themselves as a working hard, they have their various individual struggles and family responsibilities, and they only see one aspect of this bird cage metaphor that she's trying to describe. She says they see only one barrier and they think, why can't that person figure out how to, move forward? And she says what they don't see is that there are several barriers. As I pointed out earlier, there's classism, there's sexism, there's homophobia, there's racism, there's citizenism, for example, there's ableism, there's ageism. So there's multiple barriers that some people deal with. Even if you yourself have no barriers or just one barrier, don't assume that the same is true for other people. And lastly, I take directly from the book, she says, the bird is surrounded by a network of systematically related barriers, no one of which would be the least hindrance to its flight, but which, by their relations to each other, are as confining as the solid walls of the dungeon. She says, we must consider the structure as a whole and not use one outlier as a reason to dismiss history, layers of inequality, and systematic hierarchies designed with the intent to discriminate. And one of the examples that I have is I say that a lot of people say that racism no longer exists because we have had a black president, President Obama. He's actually half black, he's mixed race, and they believe that because he is the president, this negates systematic racism. However, what we know is that one president or one person in leadership doesn't mean that everyone else doesn't have those barriers. And it doesn't even mean that he no longer experienced racism, as we've seen time and time again throughout presidential his presidency, as we have seen time and time again throughout his presidency. So again, I ask you to consider, what does it feel like to be on the other side of that cage? And if you don't see the bars of the cage, then what might other people see as their oppressions or their bars in their cage?